There are three things that make up the foundation of a camera being a useful tool: usability, reliability, and of course, the image. What's going on, guys? I'm Yashai, this is FireFace Films, and today we're talking about why I'm ditching my Fujifilm XH2s for video. But before we do, make sure you drop a like, get subscribed, and click that bell to get notified when we post. Alright, on with the show. Okay, so before we get started, I have to stress that this is not a video of me saying the XH2s can't work for you. It's more of a reflection on why it doesn't work for me and why it may not work for you. So let's get started talking about the usability of the camera. And first up, I gotta say the biggest knock is that the camera does not have universal support for timecode. Now I say universal support because more recently, Fujifilm has added support for timecode via the Atomos UltraSync system and the ambient nano-locket system, yet they're excluding Deity and Tentacle, something that I would hazard a guess in saying that a lot more people have. And this is a thing that I can't comprehend why they've gone with this decision, but it's very frustrating as a user of timecode. I am a Deity timecode user. You've heard me sing the praises of timecode multiple times on this channel. You can find some of that in the channel below. But yeah, it's one of the things that has frustrated me from day one. I have to use the audio LTC method, which for my own purposes, not a problem. But when you have to hand off LTC footage to a client, some of them are going to be like, what are you giving me right now? Why is it like this? And I would rather have a more seamless experience like with my FX6, like with Pocket 4K, and possibly something like an FX30. So yeah, timecode not being integrated properly is a bummer, but I guess for some people, it's better to have limited and selective timecode support rather than none, which is where we were, but it's still frustrating, and I wish that we had full-on timecode support with all devices. And then the next thing is autofocus. Now, autofocus on this camera has been a mixed bag from the beginning. We all know that at first the autofocus was decent, not too bad, and then over time with firmware updates, it got better. And then same firmware updates ended up breaking the autofocus, which is extremely problematic. You ideally don't want your firmware updates to worsen your camera. There was a whole fiasco where FX30s and FX30 were being bricked essentially by firmware updates. That was, significantly worse than ruining your autofocus. But for us Fuji users, having the already somewhat dodgy autofocus be crippled by firmware updates was really frustrating. And then firmware updates aside, I have to say that relying on the box to autofocus was always a problem to me, because it's really frustrating to have to rely on the box, and if it's such a small target, and if by user error you happen to put that box in the wrong spot, the focus will never recover, as the eye tracking auto is still going to rely on that box. You have to be in the general area of the box to get focused. Maybe if it was at least a wider area, it's selectable, sure it's selectable, but you don't want to have to be babysitting the selectable focus box at all times. And I just think that's a little bit more of a primitive option, especially in the market today. Canon's great autofocus, Sony's class leading autofocus, even Panasonic now has excellent autofocus. So for Fuji to be trailing the game, Fuji honestly in terms of autofocus systems is bottom of the barrel. Like, it's good, but it's not good enough. And that's one thing that I can't abide by anymore. I would rather have no autofocus than bad autofocus. It's kind of like that idea of you'd rather have no internet than bad internet, because bad internet is frustrating, but no internet, you're not thinking about it. If I had no autofocus, I wouldn't worry about it. But since I have autofocus that is times unreliable, I can't count on it, and it's really frustrating. When you're trying to zoom and focus at the same time, you've seen what that looks like, and it is terrible, in addition to a lot of the kind of stepping action. And speaking of lenses, I would say that autofocus on Fuji lenses for video, it's been a mixed bag too, because you have to think about the fact that a lot of Fuji lenses at first were definitely photo oriented. Like, I have the 16-55 2.8. That lens autofocus is fine because it has a linear motor. But for all the Fuji lenses that have stepping motors, the autofocus is honestly kind of trash. I have the 35 f2 and I've used it honestly less and less for video because I cannot stand focus breathing is one thing, but it's the fact that autofocus becomes exceedingly jumpy when you have that stepping motor. I haven't had it happen in active projects too much, but it's very noticeable. Like, it's one of those things that it doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's really bad. It's really noticeable. And that just goes with all the stepping motor lenses, which is the vast majority of Fuji lenses. Most of them are catching up with linear motors, but we're still not there with the full selection of Fuji lenses being linear motors, and especially not any of the third-party options. So that's where both the system and the lenses that make them, that go together, are problematic. And God, it's one of those things where you gotta wonder, how does this systemic problem get fixed? Obviously, it's gonna be through firmware updates and software changes, but how long do we have to wait for that? Now let's talk about the controls. So it's been a big point about the fact that all of the dials and buttons are shared between photo and video mode. So essentially, if you set some buttons to video functions and some button to photo functions, they're going to be useless in either mode. So if I set my down on the D-pad to turn on 120 FPS, that down on the D-pad in photo mode is not going to do anything. And if I set my up on the D-pad for focus bracketing, that's not going to do anything in video mode. So essentially, you have to make a choice about what buttons are going to do what, and you have to stick to that, which is, it's annoying. Especially, that's one of those things where it's annoying. There are a lot of cameras that have the ability to switch between a dedicated photo and video mode, and all the buttons are going to be assigned to photo features, or all the buttons are going to be assigned to video features. And the XH2s should have that. Why it doesn't is a mystery to me. It's been resolved for a while, but it confounds me. It confuses me that the dials were not user assignable for quite a while. It was a feature that had to be requested by the community to say, hey, our dials should be able to be changed to what we want to use them as. That is a crazy thing, especially the fact that ISO used to be mapped to, you had to press the ISO button and then cycle through the list of options rather than just be able to change the ISO with a wheel. The fact that that kind of design choice went through is shocking to me. Now, this is more of an issue with Fuji's direction, but it's the fact of their inability to fully commit to video work. One is the fact that the XH2s is their flagship camera, or at least it was until the GFX stuff started happening. But it was their flagship camera, and yet they don't have any proper monitoring tools. All you have is histograms, and I believe zebras, but the zebras can't go to the full range that you might need them to go for certain options. There's no 4:3 mode for anamorphic, and you know, anamorphic support in general. In-camera D-squeeze would be nice. The option for shutter angle, the fact that we are this deep in and we still do not have shutter angle is, honestly, it's absurd. It's truly absurd. And then there's also in-camera LUT support. Every other camera I use, granted there's only two of them, the FX6, Pocket 4K, they both have in-camera LUT support. The fact that the Fujifilm XH2s does not is absurd. And it's really indicative of Fuji's non-committal nature to video. They keep dipping in these little video features, but then they don't do the full Monty. Every other camera is more committed to video than this, and it's absurd, especially given the price point. Everything else around it has been shifting, but the XH2s has been holding strong at $2,500, and it's not justifying that price anymore. Now, reliability, I would say one of the things is a lot of the reliability issues came from features being broken in firmware updates. We saw a lot of nonsense happen with some of those midway firmware updates that got corrected, but the fact that that happened, I don't know, it's not great. And then as previously mentioned, the autofocus got broken by previous firmware updates, unacceptable. One thing that I've noticed is that the camera has odd HDMI issues. If you go over to Cine Daly's channels, Joshua Martin, he would show that when he was doing his testing with the Blackmagic video assist, that there would be moments where the HDMI feed would get really jittery and start dropping frames, and that would actually come through on the recording. And he theorized that it might have been an issue with the connection between the recorder and camera and cable. And in my own testing, I actually did test the Blackmagic Video Assist with the XH2s at some point, but the results were nothing to write home about. It was honestly a pretty bad experience, so I just didn't make a video about it. But I did also experience that jittery frame stuff going on and losing frames. And then I also ended up experiencing it on my Shinobi monitor. So that's just a plain monitor, no recording. And while connected to HDMI, there are times where the feed starts dropping frames. And I know it's through the HDMI cable because once you half press the shutter, it goes away. It'll like flash the exposure read and then reset back to a normal view. So that's an issue that, especially if you're going to be wirelessly transmitting, you're going to run into that issue and someone's going to look at that feed and say, what is that? And I think generally we want to minimize those kinds of things. And I gotta say, one of the things that's still a reliability issue to me is the fact that zoom lenses still have really odd quirks. One thing I still run into, even with the 16 to 55, is that if you're all the way zoomed in or at any zoom value and you zoom all the way out, the edges of the frame will warp. And I know people have seen this. Everyone has experienced it. And I don't understand why this is something that happens. Even if you turn off lens corrections, you turn off IBIS, the frame will jump and you can see it in the footage. So there's no reason. It is an optical zoom. So why is my frame jumping at the corners? And then there's still the fact of the matter of zoom lenses on the third party being honestly unusable for video because of the weird zooming issues. And I haven't seen a lot of people talk about that, so I don't know if that's something that's been resolved, because the problem is it was so botched at time of release that people did not want to commit to it. So how can we know if it's been fixed? If anybody has any insight into that, please drop in the comments below because I want to know. And then this last thing is that it's not exclusively a Fuji problem, but what happened to the battery doors having a little hatch to slide through a cable, dummy cable battery? A lot of these cameras now don't have the little hatch. I'm more thinking like the GH4, GH5, where they had a little gasket, you pull it out, and that way the cable for the dummy battery can slide on through. These days, you either have to just leave the door hanging open or take the door all the way off. And I think that's kind of ridiculous. So someone's please got to explain to me what happened to those little gaskets. And now for what to me is the biggest factor of why this camera no longer works for me, and that is the image. So to start, it's been talked to death, but the over-sharpened nature of the footage, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Every time I look at it in comparison to either my FX6 footage or my Pocket 4K footage, there's something about it that is texturally wrong. And yes, you can soften up the image, but generally, I think generally, we like to see images that look right out of the gate. You know, we can make all the corrections we want, but we don't want to make less corrections to get towards our final image. And the fact that the image is so over sharpened and to me texturally wrong it's off-putting, and it does not inspire confidence. It continues to shock me to this day that we went for over a calendar year and a half, and I think a little bit more, without an official input transform for FLog 2 in DaVinci Resolve. And then they went ahead and introduced FLog 2C, and now that doesn't have an official input transform in DaVinci Resolve. I ended up having to resort to a DCTL from Thatcher Freeman. He is a fantastic guy, and his DCTLs are great. I was struggling for a very long time with my FLog 2 footage and transforming it before I got those DCTLs. So Thatcher, thank you so much. Those are fantastic. To that end though, I do have to say that most of the time, until I got those official transforms, and even then it still doesn't feel quite right, I would have to use different CST inputs to get the footage to where I felt like it was more pleasing. So typically I was either using, now I know, I like to try and interpret it with as S-Log3 or use ARRILOG C3 to input it through DaVinci Wide Gamut out to JP2499. Ultimately, I found that once I was doing that, I was getting closer to an image that I enjoyed, but there were still some issues with it. Namely, the pervasive noise. I don't know about you guys, but no matter how much I expose this camera, +1, +2, and in rare occasions, +3 stops, there was still strange noise in the image. I had just saw something the other day. I was out in broad daylight. I overexposed a 1.5 stops, and I could see noise in the sky. I don't understand how that's possible. Even on the shadow side of my face on an outdoor, brightly sunlit day, there's noise. And yes, the noise pattern on the XH2s is film-like, and it doesn't have that digital quality, but it's the fact that it is there. Because with the FX6 and the Pocket 4K, I can expose those cameras +1, +2, and have pristine imagery that I can then manipulate. Say I want to throw in some grain or make adjustments without having digital noise so in the image. To that end, I can't understand why the color, the fidelity of the image seems to be very fragile. And what I mean by that is when I actually start using this footage under the LUTs that I use, and for context, the LUTs that I use are all designed to work in DaVinci Wide Gamut color workflows. Those LUTs cooperate with a number of cameras. I've used them on Sony cameras, Blackmagic, Red, even Rec 709 footage. It plays nice, but for whatever reason, FLog 2 and FLog 2C footage does not like the LUTs that I use. And when I start to make adjustments, namely saturation adjustments and inverse contrast, where we start to reduce contrast, the image starts to break apart really fast. The biggest thing is that colors get chattery. And I'm gonna have some footage on the screen here so you can see that. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see it through YouTube compression, but if you can look in these images here, hopefully you can see, and I will try to draw more attention to it, that the colors start to act and behave very strangely. And it's no combination of shooting in ProRes, H.265 All-I, H.265 Long GOP, the highest compression. You definitely don't want to shoot the lowest compression because you start getting really weird stuff going on. But shooting in ProRes 422, no LT, and then some HQ, I've tried it all, and I cannot get the colors to not break apart. So that is one of the biggest things. Honestly, it is the biggest deal breaker to me because I'm both DP and colorist, and I need to be able to trust the image. I can shoot it, it can look great, but as soon as I start to grade that image and it falls apart, that's problematic, and I can't abide by it. And ultimately, that is the biggest deal breaker for me because I can deal with a camera that might not have the best usability and might not have the best reliability, but if the image on top of both of those things is problematic, then it's a bridge too far. All of this to say, you can still make fantastic imagery with this camera in the right situation, in the right circumstances. But ultimately, this camera isn't the one for me because in a number of cases, I felt like I had to work for the camera and not make the camera work for me. And that's not what you want to do for your tool. You don't want to have to work for the tool to make your situation work. You want your tool to work for you. It's a shame that even with the GFX Eterna coming and raising even the slightest chance of there being a cinema version of the XH2s fixing the reliability and usability problems, ultimately at the heart of the camera, the sensor, there's still going to be those image problems. Now, I do say that maybe there's a chance I might improve those image problems because even with the GFX Eterna, they are still managing to somehow squeeze out open gate. So they are working on an existing sensor to get new features and capabilities out of it. So maybe, just maybe, that XH2s cinema version comes out and they've introduced FLog 3, which, I don't know, FLog 2 just came out, so it's probably too soon. But maybe they introduce something to that sensor to where it stops having some of these issues. And if that's the case, then that camera would be killer. But you can't count on it because we don't know if it's coming. And I can't wait on something that I don't know is coming. And in the wake of this, I'm going to be trading my XH2s for an FX30 so that it more closely matches my FX6, because on jobs where I need to be using multiple cameras, I want to have something that's easier to match, something that's going to line up better. Because one of the things that I found trying to use these as a multi-camera thing is just purely that matching color aspect. And it's not that matching colors and cameras is hard, it's just you have to work harder. So I'd rather not have to work that hard. And I didn't mention OpenGate. It's cool, it's really great, but I found myself using it less and less. And it's shocking to me that a 16:9 6K mode never came. What's with that? But before I go off on too much of a tangent, I gotta say that's gonna do it for us today, you guys. I hope you enjoyed what you saw here, and if you learned something, tell me in the comments below, and make sure you, of course, drop that like. And if you really loved it, please subscribe. Please subscribe to the channel and support what's going on here. We got a lot of interesting stuff. As always, the conclusion to my testing of the DJI Focus Pro is coming very soon. I have spent the last about 6 months since I posted this video right here testing it out, and my results have been interesting to say the least. But if you want to see more about that, make sure you're subscribed, and we will see you guys in the next one.